Pontius Pilate stands at one of the most consequential crossroads in history. His name is spoken every time the story of Jesus' crucifixion is told, yet outside of that moment, he often remains a shadowy figure. To understand what happened in Jerusalem, it is essential to understand who Pilate was, what power he held, and the political system he represented. This was not a religious trial unfolding in isolation. It was a Roman decision made within a volatile imperial province. Pilate was not a king like Herod, nor was he a senator ruling from Rome. He was a prefect, later called a governor, appointed directly by the Roman emperor to oversee Judea. His role was simple in theory and brutal in practice: maintain order, collect taxes, suppress rebellion, and protect Roman interests at all costs. Judea was not an easy assignment. It was one of the most unstable regions of the empire, marked by deep religious tension and constant resistance to foreign rule. Roman governors like Pilate ruled with limited troops but immense authority. They had the power to appoint local officials, enforce Roman law, and carry out executions. Most importantly, they controlled capital punishment. No local council could legally execute someone without Roman approval. This single fact places Pilate at the center of Jesus' death, not as a passive observer, but as the final authority. Ancient sources portray Pilate as a rigid and often insensitive ruler. Jewish historians such as Josephus describe him repeatedly provoking the population, disregarding religious customs, and using force to assert Roman dominance. These were not isolated mistakes. They reveal a governing style rooted in intimidation rather than diplomacy, a dangerous approach in a province already on edge. One early incident illustrates this clearly. Pilate ordered Roman standards-bearing imperial images to be brought into Jerusalem under cover of night. For the Jewish population, these images violated sacred law. Protests erupted, and when Pilate threatened violence, the crowd reportedly chose death rather than submission. Surprisingly, Pilate backed down. This moment reveals something critical. He was capable of retreat when unrest threatened to spiral beyond his control. This tension between authority and fear would define Pilate's rule. Rome expected results, not excuses. A governor who failed to keep order risked removal, or worse. Judea had already seen uprisings crushed with mass executions. Pilate knew the consequences of appearing weak, especially during major festivals like Passover, when Jerusalem's population swelled and nationalist sentiment ran high. It's worth pausing here briefly. If you're interested in understanding how Roman power, politics, and archaeology intersect with biblical events, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Each video builds on the last, uncovering the real historical forces behind familiar stories. Pilate's residence in Judea was not Jerusalem, but Caesarea Maritima, a Roman-built port city designed to project imperial power. He traveled to Jerusalem primarily during festivals, when the risk of unrest was highest. His presence during Passover, when Jesus was arrested, was not accidental. It was standard Roman protocol in a city known for explosive religious fervor. By the time Jesus entered Jerusalem, Pilate had already accumulated a reputation. His use of temple funds to build aqueducts, his violent suppression of protests, and his disregard for Jewish law had made him deeply unpopular. At the same time, Rome was watching closely. Complaints from Judean leaders had already reached imperial ears. Pilate was ruling under pressure. The Gospels portray Pilate as conflicted, even hesitant. This portrayal has often been debated, but when placed within historical context, it becomes more plausible. Pilate faced a delicate balancing act. Executing a popular figure could provoke unrest. Refusing to act could signal weakness to both local leaders and Rome. Either path carried risk. Crucifixion itself was not a religious punishment. It was a Roman instrument of terror, reserved for rebels, slaves, and those accused of challenging imperial authority. The charge that mattered to Rome was not theology, but kingship. Anyone claiming to be a king outside Roman approval was, by definition, a threat to Caesar. Understanding Pilate's world reframes the trial of Jesus entirely. What unfolded was not a misunderstanding between cultures, but a calculated political decision made under pressure. Roman law, imperial fear, local tension, and personal survival all converged in one moment. Pilate did not ask whether Jesus was divine. He asked whether he was dangerous. As we continue, we'll examine the archaeological evidence that confirms Pilate's existence, the famous inscription bearing his name, and how Roman legal procedure shaped the events that followed. Far from weakening the gospel accounts, history places them firmly within a real and brutal system of power. Unlike many figures from antiquity, Pontius Pilate is not known only from literary sources. His existence is confirmed by archaeology, anchoring the gospel accounts firmly in material evidence. In 1961, archaeologists excavating the ancient Roman theatre at Caesarea Maritima uncovered a limestone block bearing a Latin inscription. Though damaged, the text clearly preserved Pilate's name and title, identifying him as prefect of Judea. This inscription, now known as the Pilate Stone, is one of the most important archaeological discoveries related to the New Testament. It confirms not only that Pilate existed, but that he held the exact office described in historical sources. He was not a myth, not a later invention, but a Roman official embedded in the imperial administrative system. For historians, this single artifact carries immense weight. The title prefect is especially revealing. It places Pilate within the early phase of Roman governance in Judea, before the province was elevated to higher status. Prefects were military administrators, not diplomats. Their primary responsibility was security. This explains Pilate's frequent reliance on force and his limited tolerance for dissent. Roman governance in Judea relied on cooperation with local elites, particularly the priestly leadership in Jerusalem. These leaders maintained religious authority while Rome retained political control. The relationship was fragile and often transactional. Local leaders needed Roman backing to maintain their positions, while Rome depended on them to keep the population calm. Pilate's tenure was marked by repeated breakdowns in this relationship. Josephus records multiple incidents in which Pilate offended religious sensibilities, provoking unrest. One account describes Pilate secretly using temple funds to finance an aqueduct, triggering mass protests. When crowds confronted him, Pilate disguised soldiers among them and ordered a violent crackdown. This was not hesitation. It was calculated repression. These actions reveal Pilate's governing philosophy. He was not attempting to win loyalty. He was enforcing compliance. Yet this approach carried risks. Rome tolerated brutality only so long as it preserved order. Excessive violence that destabilized a province could end a governor's career. Pilate constantly walked this line. Philo of Alexandria provides another perspective, describing Pilate as inflexible, harsh, and prone to cruelty. Though writing with his own biases, Philo's account aligns with Josephus in key ways. Together they paint a consistent picture of a ruler who governed through fear, yet remained vulnerable to political pressure. This vulnerability helps explain Pilate's behavior during Jesus' trial. By the time Jesus was arrested, Pilate had already faced complaints sent to Rome. His position was not secure. Any report suggesting he tolerated rebellion, especially during Passover, could be disastrous. Stability was not just policy, it was survival. If you're finding these historical connections helpful, this is exactly the kind of evidence-based analysis the channel focuses on. Subscribing ensures you won't miss future episodes as we continue unpacking how archaeology and Roman history illuminate the biblical world. The Roman legal system granted governors wide discretion. Trials were not bound by modern standards of due process. Governors could interrogate, sentence, or release individuals based on perceived threat. Legal consistency mattered less than political outcome. In this system, guilt was defined by danger, not morality. Crucifixion functioned as a public warning. Victims were displayed along roads or city entrances, reinforcing Roman dominance. The method was intentionally degrading and slow. Its purpose was deterrence. Any suggestion that someone claimed kingship outside Roman authority made crucifixion the expected response. The charge brought before Pilate was therefore decisive. Jesus was not presented as a teacher or philosopher, but as someone associated with kingship. This reframing transformed a religious dispute into a political case. Once framed this way, Pilate's options narrowed dramatically. Archaeology, Roman law, and historical sources converge on a single conclusion. Pilate's role was neither accidental nor symbolic. He was the legal mechanism through which Rome exercised lethal authority. The trial of Jesus unfolded not in a vacuum of belief, but within a rigid imperial system designed to eliminate threats swiftly. In the final part, we'll examine how this system played out during the trial itself, why Pilate ultimately authorized the execution, and what the consequences were for Judea, for Rome, and for history. The trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate was not a theological debate but a political calculation. Roman governors did not concern themselves with internal religious disputes unless those disputes threatened imperial stability. What mattered to Pilate was not doctrine, but control. When Jesus was brought before him, the central question was simple. Did this man represent a threat to Roman authority? The Gospel accounts preserve this tension clearly. Pilate's questions focus on kingship, power, and authority. "Are you the king of the Jews?" was not a philosophical inquiry. It was a legal one. In Roman law, claiming kingship without imperial approval was treason. Even symbolic claims could be dangerous in a volatile province like Judea, especially during Passover, when national memory and resistance ran high. Pilate's hesitation, often interpreted as moral conflict, can be better understood as political caution. Executing Jesus risked provoking unrest among his followers. Releasing him risked appearing weak to both local leaders and Rome. Pilate stood between two pressures, a population on edge and an empire that demanded results. His authority depended on choosing the option that preserved order, not justice. The involvement of local leaders further complicated the situation. They framed the accusation in terms Rome could not ignore. By presenting Jesus as someone claiming kingship, they ensured Roman intervention. This strategic reframing transformed an internal dispute into an imperial concern. Once that shift occurred, the outcome became increasingly predictable. Roman legal procedure offered Pilate flexibility, but not neutrality. Governors could release prisoners, impose lesser punishments, or escalate to execution based on perceived threat. The ritual of offering a prisoner for release during Passover, whether formal or customary, reveals Pilate's attempt to defuse the situation without fully committing. When that attempt failed, his options narrowed. Crucifixion was the ultimate expression of Roman power. It was slow, public, and humiliating by design. The goal was not simply death, but deterrence. By displaying victims in visible places, Rome sent a message to the population: resistance leads here. In this context, the crucifixion of Jesus fits a well-established imperial pattern. The inscription placed above Jesus's cross, declaring him King of the Jews, was not a theological statement. It was a political warning. Rome executed claimants to power and labeled them as such for all to see. Ironically, the very charge meant to mock and condemn also preserved the reason for his execution in Roman terms. After authorizing the execution, Pilate fades from the gospel narratives, but history continues to track his career. His governance did not improve. Continued brutality and mismanagement eventually led to his removal. According to historical sources, Pilate was recalled to Rome after violently suppressing a Samaritan movement. His political career ended not in triumph, but in disgrace. This outcome reinforces a critical point. Pilate was not an untouchable figure. He operated under scrutiny and pressure, accountable to higher authority. His decisions in Judea were shaped by fear of failure as much as by loyalty to Rome. The execution of Jesus was not an anomaly. It was the product of a system designed to prioritize control over conscience. When archaeology, Roman law, and ancient texts are examined together, the trial of Jesus becomes historically coherent. It reflects the realities of imperial governance, local collaboration, and political survival. The Gospel accounts do not describe an implausible scene. They describe a familiar one, repeated across the empire whenever order was threatened. Understanding Pilate does not shift responsibility away from Rome, nor does it oversimplify the role of local leaders. Instead, it reveals how power functioned in the ancient world. Decisions were made quickly, force was normalized, and individual lives were expendable in service of stability. If you want to continue exploring how Roman power, archaeology, and historical evidence illuminate the world behind the Bible, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Each video builds on the last, uncovering how real empires, real officials, and real decisions shaped events that still resonate today. Pontius Pilate sought to preserve Roman order in a distant province. In doing so, he authorized an execution that would echo far beyond his own career. Empires rise and fall, governors are forgotten, but some moments in history refuse to disappear. This was one of them.